hadn't meant to stop at the auction. The street was dust and heat, the sound of hooves echoing down from the corral, men's voices sharp with drink and cruelty. He had only come for supplies, salt, nails, a spool of wire. But then he saw her. She was bound at the wrists, a chain looped to the post as if she were no more than an animal. Her head hung low, hair matted with dirt, her dress torn where it should have covered. She didn't look at the men who circled her, didn't answer their jeers. Her silence carried more weight than any scream could. The man, most knew him only as the blacksmith, stood at the edge of the crowd. His coat was worn, his hat pulled low. He hadn't spoken 10 words in weeks, not since the storm that had taken his brother. But something in the way she kept still, shoulders squared even under the shame, fastened him in place. The auctioneer barked numbers. The crowd laughed. One man shoved another, wagering a coin for the first bid. It was not a market for grain or cattle. This was a sale of flesh. The blacksmith's jaw tightened. His hand brushed the pouch at his belt, where a few coins lay hidden. Enough to keep a forge burning, not enough to waste. Yet when the bid stalled, when the men grew restless and the auctioneer's smile faltered, a voice rang out. His voice. The crowd turned. They knew him, quiet, solitary, not one to raise his hand. Still, the coin left his palm, dull silver catching the light. The auctioneer banged his gavel, eager to be done with the lot. And just like that, she was his. They released the chain. She stumbled, catching herself before she fell. When they pushed her forward, she didn't fight, only raised her eyes for the first time. Dark, hollow, but steady. "You paid my price," she said, her voice hoarse but unbroken. "Now let me go." The blacksmith said nothing. He only lifted his hand, guiding her away from the jeers, past the saloon and the dust-choked street, to where his horse waited. He didn't touch her, didn't bind her. She could have run. Yet she followed. It was only later, when they reached the forge on the edge of town, that he saw it. She sat by the water trough, lifting her wrists to drink. The iron cuffs had bitten deep, leaving marks that weren't random. Not just scars, but patterns. Tiny grooves and knots, as though someone had carved a story into her skin. The blacksmith froze, the fire of the forge crackling behind him. They weren't the wounds of a beaten captive. They were deliberate. They carried meaning. She noticed him staring. Slowly, she lowered her hands, hiding the marks beneath the folds of her ragged dress. For the first time, her eyes betrayed something more than emptiness, a flicker of fear. The blacksmith turned away, but the image stayed with him. The story written in flesh, the weight she carried without words. That night, he laid a blanket by the forge and left her bread and water. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The scars on her wrists had already spoken. And though she had begged him to let her go, he knew she wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. He left the forge door open so the night could breathe. Heat lived in the coals, but did not crowd the room. He set the tin cup on the table, with the handle turned right. He placed the knife with the blade away from the edge. He did these things without thinking. A house keeps its own temper when small things face the right way. She ate the bread in slow bites, as if timing mattered. She did not look at him, yet she tracked the room the way a person checks exits by sound. When she finished, she folded the scrap of paper the bread had come in and tucked it into the seam of her sleeve, saving even the useless. The blacksmith raked the fire and let the bellows rest. The horse in the lean-to shifted once and settled. Rain tried the roof and failed. Coyotes argued and then made peace. He lay on the cot and kept his boots on because sleep and duty share a door in a shop like this. She curled on the blanket near the embers with her back to the anvil, as if metal could keep watch. The chain he had bought with her lay coiled beneath the bench, iron quiet at last. Near midnight she rose without sound. She went to the water and washed her wrists. In the glow, the grooves showed again, not random, not cruel for the sake of it. Short lines like river marks, tiny knots in scar tissue that looked like a count. She unwound a thin thread from her hem and retied it around her wrist with a pattern of 2 and 3. Pause. 1, then 2 again. She breathed on it as if waking a habit, then hid it under the sleeve. He saw all this by pretending to sleep and failing. He stood and moved the shotgun from its peg to the corner, muzzle to floor. She watched that choice, and her shoulders eased a fraction. He moved the hammer from the table to the shelf. He set his hat where a guest would not have to see it first thing. He did not speak. The room learned quiet that did not sting. Toward dawn, the wind changed. A wagon creaked on the road. 2 men laughed in a way that did not involve humor. He could smell the sour of cheap whiskey and the oil that men use when rope is more than tool. The woman stilled. Her hands went to the marks at her wrists and then to the door latch, not to open it, to learn it. He poured water. He cut a thin slice of meat and a heel of bread. He set both near the stove and pointed to the back room. She shook her head. She stayed where she could see sky through the seam in the roof boards. The wagon rolled past without stopping. Dust settled like a decision postponed. When light colored the window, he finally asked the only question that did not feel like trespass. "Do you have a name?" She touched her throat, then the skin above the wrist, then the door. "Later," she said, voice rough but steady. "Road first." He did not ask what road. He ground a pinch of blue clay into the kettle water and let it steep. The smell made the air clean. She lifted the cup and turned the handle to the right with her thumb, the same way he had said it. That small echo let something unclench between them. She examined his shoulder strap, where it had split near the buckle. She threaded a needle with a strand she pulled from the inside edge of her skirt and sewed it true. The stitch had a rhythm he did not know. She finished with a tiny knot tucked between leather and lining, unseen, unwilling to snag. She handed it back with a nod that said the strap would now outlive the coat. He opened the barn. The mare blew warm breath and nudged his sleeve, looking for the sugar he never carried. He lifted the saddle down and cleaned the cinch, the old habit of men who need their animals to forgive human mistakes. The woman watched the yard. Her gaze lingered on the far fence where the posts leaned toward each other like men sharing a lie. When she finally spoke, she did it like a person laying out tools. "2 children are waiting by the burned cottonwood," she said. "A woman with them. We go by the wash. We do not touch the road." Her hand went to the marks again. She traced a line from scar to scar, and then to the table's surface, drawing a curve in the dust. He recognized the shape. The river below town, the place where the bank cut through and the current ran shallow under the rocks. He had shod ranch horses down there. He had seen sign he had not named. "You led others," he said. She did not answer. She took a coal from the stove with tongs and pressed it lightly to the doorpost, leaving a small arc of black. a half moon, blunt at one end, thin at the other. She blew the ember out and set the tongs back. The mark looked like nothing and like warning at the same time. "Means safe if the door stays open," she said. "Means nothing if you shut it." He stood with the bridle in his hands and felt the weight of that. Men in town liked to pick sides when there were spectators. This would be chosen alone, and only the house would know. He saddled the mare and brought out a second halter. He cut a strip from a sack and wrapped it around the bell on the old mule's neck. The mule tolerated the indignity like a saint. He packed a small loaf, 2 jars, a coil of clean rope, and his farrier's knife, the one that cut leather kinder than it cut skin. He did not take a rifle. He strapped on the hammer instead. Some tools remember what they are for. She lifted the chain from under the bench and laid it straight on the floor. She put the key beside it, teeth up. She looked at him as if asking whether the house wanted to keep the memory or send it out with the sweepings. He slid both under the anvil foot. Let metal hold what metal had done. They left at first light. He took the lead on the mule so the mare would step where she should. She walked with the easy quiet of someone who knows where ground lies under flood. They kept fences to their right and the town to their left. Dogs barked and then forgot. The smell of coffee drifted from porches. A rooster crowed late and unconvincing. At the burned cottonwood, 3 shapes uncurled from brush. A boy with winter eyes, a girl with braid frayed to threads, and a woman who wore her fear like a bundle she had decided to carry and not set down. The woman did not plead. She only looked at the black mark on his sleeve, where soot had kissed him in the shop, and at the mule's wrapped bell, and then at the stranger with the marked wrists. "Road first," the stranger said again. They moved as a loose string. No talking. A buzzard circled and lost interest. A hawk wrote a sentence in the sky and crossed it out. At the dry wash, the stranger stopped and knelt. She pulled the thread from her wrist and tied it to a twig, then pushed the twig into the bank so it pointed in a direction that was not obvious. The children watched as if a map had just learned to breathe. They crossed where water still listened to stone. He waded shin deep. The mare stepped careful. The mule did his slow arithmetic and got it right. On the other side, they climbed through salt bush and stayed in the long shadow where men on the ridge would see only sage and patience. Hoof prints faded behind them. The town's noises fell away. By noon, they reached a bend with cottonwoods unburned. Shade lay like kindness. He cut the bread thin and split it again. The boy took his share and halved it for the girl without being told. The woman drank and set the cup down with the handle to the right. The lesson passed in a glance. The stranger checked her wrists and retied the thread in a new pattern. 2 knots, long pause, 1. She tapped the ground once with her fingertips, and the woman nodded as if the road had just sent word ahead. They rested only long enough for breath to decide to stay. When they rose, the wind changed. From the ridge came the slow approach of a horse that believed in its rider. Not many. 2, maybe. The kind of pace men use when they want to be seen but not held responsible. The stranger looked at the blacksmith. No fear now. Just a question. Will the door behind us stay open if the men ahead try to close the one in front? He put the farrier's knife away and picked up the hammer. He checked the mule's wrapped bell and the little knot at the stranger's wrist. He turned the cup handle right, even though they had already drunk. He made the small choices that line up before a big one can arrive and be answered clean. Road first, he said, as if borrowing her language would help his feet remember where to go. They stepped into the heat. The riders crested the ridge. Dust rose. The hammer felt heavier, and also right. The stranger lifted her chin, the marks on her wrists dark against skin. The children gripped the mule's tail rope. The woman touched the coal arc on a small limb and broke it clean, leaving the mark behind them on bark where a person might look for it later. The ridge kept its own counsel. The men began to smile in a way that had nothing to do with greetings. The day narrowed to a path with room for one decision. The riders came down the ridge slow, like men who wanted to remind the world the ground belonged to them. Dust rolled off their horses' hooves and hung in the heat. The children pressed close to the mule's flank. The woman pulled her shawl tighter, though the day burned. The stranger stood straight, her wrists bare now, scars showing clear in the sun. The blacksmith felt the weight of the hammer in his hand, the wood grip polished by years of work. Not war. Still, a hammer knows both. He stepped ahead of the group, boots sinking into sand, shoulders set. He did not shout, did not move fast. Just stood there, a wall where there had been no wall. The riders slowed. Their laughter turned thin. They were not young, not reckless. Men who had done this too many times and expected it to end the same. One leaned in the saddle, eyes on the girl with the marked wrists. "Thought we'd lost our trail," he said, voice cracked with dust. "Seems you picked up what wasn't yours." The blacksmith said nothing. The hammer stayed at his side, heavy and plain. Silence stretched. Even the mule stopped chewing. The second rider spat in the dirt. "We'll take her back. Best you step aside. Won't cost you more than pride." Still no answer. The blacksmith's face stayed unreadable. The stranger behind him did not flinch. Her scars caught the light like writing the men could not read. She lifted her chin, and for the first time, her mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something harder, sharper. The riders shifted in their saddles. The silence bent around them, pressing. One horse stamped, uneasy. Finally, the blacksmith raised the hammer. Not in threat, just lifting it to rest across his shoulder. The gesture was quiet, but it changed the air. Work tool, war tool, no difference. His eyes stayed on theirs until their smirk drained away. The first rider cursed under his breath. He pulled on his reins, the horse turning slow. "Not worth the trouble," he muttered. The other followed, though his stare lingered on the girl a heartbeat longer than it should have. They rode off, dust swallowing them, their laughter gone now. The children exhaled, soundless relief. The woman's hands shook as she tied the shawl tighter. The stranger did not move until the riders were only specks against the far ridge. Then she stepped forward, close to the blacksmith's side. "You paid my price," she whispered, softer now, almost broken. "But you don't know what it bought." She turned her wrists over, scars plain in the sun, grooves and knots like secret letters carved in flesh. She held them up not as plea, but as truth. The blacksmith looked. He did not turn away. His jaw set, and in his silence was a vow. The road stretched ahead, empty but waiting. They kept to the wash until the sun gave up on being kind. Heat wavered over the flats, but the path held. At the second cut bank, the stranger stopped, knelt, and pressed her palm to the ground as if listening with the bones. She tied her thread to a reed and leaned it west. The woman with the children mirrored the motion and relaxed a fraction. A habit had found its shape again. By late light, the world changed tone. Willow, a strip of water that remembered how to move, cots made of brush. People slid out of shadow without surprising the air. No shouts. A boy with ash on his fingers. An old man with a bone comb. A girl carrying a kettle by its cool rim. They looked at the blacksmith long enough to read his boots, his hands. The hammer hung at his belt. They looked longer at the stranger's wrists and at the mule's muffled bell. The small decisions that make larger ones possible. The woman set the children beneath Willow and pressed her lips to their hair once each. The stranger untied her thread and slipped it away, then touched the boy's shoulder and the girl's braid, and laid her palm on the woman's sleeve, as if counting to 3 with skin. Something eased without leaving. They ate little and useful. Meat cut thin, willow bark tea, a heel of bread split twice. The girl turned the cup so the handle faced right, and the old man nodded at that, pleased the lesson had traveled. The blacksmith set his knife with the blade away from the edge, and the girl copied that too, solemn as a vow. When it was time to move, again, not everyone rose. A woman stayed. A man with a healing limp stayed. The old man set his hand flat to the ground, and the stranger set hers on top. They both looked at the blacksmith. She drew a short arc in dust with 2 fingers. He did not need more talk. The arc wanted a door frame. They turned toward town in a crescent that avoided the places where rope likes to rest. Coyotes stitched themselves between brush and vanished. The ridge kept its weather. They reached the forge at gray. The door stood as they had left it. The coal arc on the post held its shape. The blacksmith opened wide and let morning find the inside on its own. He put the kettle on, ground a pinch of blue clay into the water, set the cup with its handle right. The stranger placed the chain on the floor in a straight line and set the key beside it, teeth up. She did not ask what to do with them. He slid both under the anvil foot. The house would hold the memory so people didn't have to. Hoofbeats arrived soft and sure, not the kind that try to be bigger than they are. 3 riders, then 5, then more. A ring that didn't crowd. Just learned the yard. A gray-templed woman walked to the well and wrapped a coil of grass between hook and iron to save the splice. A thin boy tested the lower hinge with his thumbnail and tapped a sliver of willow where it liked to rattle. The old man set a short staff in a heel-made hole and tied a blue bead high on the post with an extra turn rain respects. The bead swung once and settled. The staff stood like a question already answered. The deputy came alone, dust fresh on his coat. He read faces, not paper. He touched the bead with 2 fingers, then the staff, then the coal arc, as if greeting ideas in the order they had arrived. He took a plank from the pile by the shed and set it across 2 sawhorses. A table happens faster than arguments when someone builds one. Proofs went down without ceremony. A number tag cut from a collar, a leather ring severed clean, a lock of hair bound in twine. The stranger placed her wrists on the plank, palms up, scars visible, then lifted them away like placing a map before shutting it from weather. The blacksmith set his hammer beside the chain mark that still stained the floorboards, and then moved the hammer back to his belt. Tools return to where work needs them. Neighbors drifted to the fence line and stopped where fence does its oldest job. The teacher stood with chalk dust on her cuffs. The storekeeper's wife carried a jar of salt and didn't pretend she'd come for anything else. The deputy set his palm on the plank and said nothing. He didn't need to. The yard had already made a statement. Wolfers came too, late, 3, grease-slick and sure of rooms they hadn't built. They tried the tone that buys quick yeses. The gray-templed woman did not answer them. She turned the tin cup handle right and slid it toward the deputy. The deputy drank and set it back the same way. That quiet decided more than any badge ever could. The old man pointed to the chain stain, to the bead, to the coal arc, then to the road between cottonwoods and door. He spoke 5 words that belonged here without translation. Kept, shared, safe, witness, here. The teacher wrote them on the plank. She left room under each for names, prints, marks. The blacksmith signed small. The deputy signed. The storekeeper's wife signed, and then put a pinch of salt on the table edge, as if law ought to taste like something you can use. The wolfers tested the corner where men think rules forget to turn. They found horses broadside and faces that had seen rain move off a field it wanted for itself. No rifles lifted, no rope danced. The wolfers decided they had business far away. Good decisions sometimes look like retreat. They brought a dun with a back like a shelf and quiet in its eyes, and pushed it into the corral with a patience that said, "Staying is the goal." They brought a sack of meal and laid it on the step. They retied the bead higher with a thin copper ring through the knot. The old man pressed his thumb to the coal arc and left a new smudge low where children look. Meaning layered until even the post could have told it. Toward noon, a clerk rattled up with blue ribbon and a horse that deserved better hands. He read seizure and harboring and numbers that behaved indoors. The deputy tapped the staff, the bead, the words on the plank, the signatures in dust. He pointed at the anvil foot where iron slept under iron. He asked the clerk where the court lived today. The clerk tried the stamp. The gray-templed woman looked at his boots as if pity were a fixable habit. The clerk put the ribbon away because no sentence survived the yard it had arrived to rule. Afternoon brought the bankman's best idea: fire. It started down in the draw where cheatgrass forgets the favor rain did and tries to pay it back too fast. Smoke shouldered up, took a breath, and looked toward town. The stranger saw it first. She took the coal from the hearth and walked a thin line across the yard, lighting a back burn with the smallest flame a person can make and still mean it. The gray-templed woman scraped a black throat in the dirt with a shovel. The old man watched wind like a reader watches commas. The flame met itself and lost its appetite. The yard smelled of wet ash and relief. Twilight gentled. The circle shortened. 2 riders posted at the ridge, 2 at the wash. The carpenter boy mended a fence rail with a willow brace and stepped back, proud. The teacher wrote names under witness until her pencil was a stub. The storekeeper's wife moved the jar of salt from plank to sill, as if leaving blessing where a hand would find it busy. Inside, the blacksmith set the knife with its blade away from the edge and turned the cup so the handle faced right. The stranger stood at the threshold and did not cross until he slid the shotgun from its peg and set it muzzle to floor. She touched the mended strap on his shoulder and adjusted the knot she had hidden there to lie flatter. He adjusted the curtain cord she had sewn so it would not snag. They traded small repairs until the room admitted both. When the first star showed, a boy came to the gate with a cradle board carried wrong and urgent. He set it on the plank because the plank had become where truths go. The old man untied, checked, retied, and gave the board back. The boy left without speaking. The blacksmith watched the door learn how to let fear out and not let harm in. The stranger watched him watch, then untied her thread and tied it around the post above the coal mark, not as a lock, as memory. Later, when lamps in town burned short and the clerk's ribbon went quiet in a drawer, the deputy lifted the staff from its hole. He left the hole open. The bead stayed. The copper ring stayed. The coal arc stayed. He looked at the blacksmith and at the stranger and at the road that ran between door and cottonwoods, then tipped his hat and walked to where a man sleeps when he trusts other people to hear trouble first. The yard kept breathing with the ring around it, and the herd inside it, and the house at its heart. The stranger lay by the stove, on her blanket square, and set one wrist over the other, and did not hide the marks. The blacksmith lay on the cot with his boots off for the first time in a week. He left the flat stone on the shelf over the folded paper, because paper behaves better under weight. Just before sleep took the room, footsteps paused at the gate. Soft, a woman's, carrying something heavier than fear. The bead did not shine. It held the last light the way creek water holds moon when wind rests. The coal arc looked like a road if a person had learned how to read low. The stranger opened her eyes. The blacksmith sat up and swung his feet to the floor. He did not ask who. He lifted the latch. He left the door open and stepped aside. The house, finally, had learned how to be its own answer. Dawn arrived without fanfare, pale and steady. The bead on the post caught the first light, the coal arc still dark against wood. The mule brayed once, soft, and the corral horses shuffled as if they had kept the watch themselves. The stranger stood first. She folded the blanket square and set it where the stove heat had not yet reached. She touched the marks on her wrists, not to hide them, not to explain them, just to remember. She walked to the door, saw the yard still lined with riders in quiet guard, and let her shoulders fall for the first time. The blacksmith stepped beside her. He did not speak. He only set the tin cup on the sill, handle right, blade turned away. Small signs, the kind that last longer than vows. By mid-morning, townsfolk gathered at the fence line again. They did not push closer. They watched the riders, the bead, the mark, the woman with scars that read like scripture. No one laughed now. No one offered coin. A hush lay over the street, the hush of people who know they have witnessed something bigger than themselves. The deputy returned. He brought no papers this time, only set his hand on the plank table that still bore yesterday's words and nodded. "Safe," he said, a single word, enough. The stranger looked at the blacksmith then, eyes steady, unflinching. She lifted her wrists and showed him the patterns once more. "This is the road," she whispered. "Every scar a passage, every knot a soul carried through." His jaw worked, but no words came. Instead, he reached, not for her, but for the chain buried under the anvil. He pulled it free, heavy, cold, the key still set in its teeth. He placed it in her hands. "Yours now," he said quietly. She held it, studied it, then laid it across the plank table. She set the key on top, pressed her palm down once, and left it there. The chain would not bind again. It had become a witness. Evening brought quiet. The riders drifted off, one by one, back to their own trails. But the road remained marked. The bead, the coal arc, the scars carried in skin and memory. The blacksmith banked the fire, hung his hammer back on its peg, and for the first time in many seasons, left the door open through the night. The woman sat near the threshold, wrists bare, eyes lifted to the sky. For the first time, she did not ask to be let go. She stayed. And in the silence of that house, quiet, steady, unbroken, something began again. If this story held you, if the scars on her wrists spoke louder than words, subscribe, like, and tell in the comments which moment struck you most. The chain laid down, the hammer lifted, or the door left open.